Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of What They Don't Say with Lauren and Shannon. Today, we're hitting you with part 2 of our episode with Sheerin Gryloo. Oh my God, I'm a poet. And I didn't even know it. Lauren would be so mad if she heard that introduction right now. Please don't tell her. It's a secret. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I highly recommend that you go back and listen to it and then follow up with part 2. Part 2 starts right where part 1 left off, so it might not make much sense if you didn't listen to the first episode. Sheerin Gryloo is the founder of the Women's Advocacy Initiative, and we cover a whole lot in the first episode and we cover a whole lot more in the second episode. Sheerin is one of those people where when we first met her, I just wanted to keep talking to her for hours and hours. I want her to be my best friend. In my head, she's almost like effervescent, like she just radiates and she glows confidence and grace, but also strength all at the same time. It's hard to explain. If you listen to the episodes, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. So enough doting on Sheerin, even though she's clearly one of my favorite people now. Let's get into it.
Well, we hate women. Like that is
Yeah.
just like men hate women and women hate women. It is something we need to unlearn. And one thing that, I think about often when we talk about, like, I keep saying this, the idea of a perfect victim. And, I am very, very open with what I say makes me, imperfect in that sense. So, and one example is, talking to my perpetrator after, texting him afterwards. And it's like, oh, well, how is it that you were raped? How is it that you claim you were raped and that you were afraid of this individual if you were replying, haha, to his shitty jokes, a couple of months
Mhm.
later? Well, is it not because of that fear? Whether it's fear, wanting to maintain a cordial relationship, or the most, like, one of the most integral things to being human, which is wanting to be loved, right? Wanting to be not hated. It is the most
Right.
normal thing to want to, to talk to this is so common too. People, survivors who speak to their assailants after the fact, that it's incredibly common, but is the number one thing used to discredit us over and over again. And the answer to me, it was very, very just obvious. It was, well, I wanted to maintain a cordial relationship. This was someone that I feared. And also, what happens? What happens when you accept you were raped? That is petrifying, right? Because suddenly this path opens up to you and, you think, what do I do? What do I do? It is a number of deeply, unattractive options. You can go get a rape kit, you can go report it to your town office, you can do whatever. But and to open that path, that is terrifying. That is petrifying. And so it's easier, right? It's easier to not be the girl who cries rape, the girl who runs around and ruins the party by telling everybody, oh my God, this happened.
Mhm.
And that is so, it's acquainted with how we are, right? Like, how we're taught to be, which is docile ultimately, to accept what happens to us, to not rock the boat, to not ruin the party, to go along with it. And these are just very, very deep-seated human things. They're very, again, like very integral to who we are. Working with marginalized communities is absolutely, absolutely huge with, for us. I've spoken about addiction before. People who are amidst, addiction, the homeless community, immigrants, the elderly population. These are people who have not even had the chance at having a voice. There are absolutely no statistics when it comes to, the intersection of sexual violence and addiction. We will talk about, substance misuse after, sexual violence after trauma, but there is nothing other than, when I talk about it, it's my own story. It's anecdotal. And I will say, 100% of women who are addicts have experienced sexual violence, 100%. But that's just my story. So we're like, fuck it, let's go ahead and let's do a study and let's build a database with these statistics. And it's absolutely huge. And I think often, am I the right person to speak on this when I talk about addiction? Because particularly, what I was using, opiates, heroin, it's repulsive, right? In a way, like even if we, as sympathetic as we may be to the medical model of addiction, there is a visceral reaction that it incites, I think. And it is deeply disturbing and is this uncomfortable knowledge that we have to sit with when we think people do this to themselves, destroy their bodies, abandon everything and everyone that was once so, so dear to them, lose all thought or semblance of a future, of goals. The very notion of it, it sickens us, right? Love, health, community, active participation, in your society, reading the Wall Street Journal every morning. I don't know, these things that are markers of a normal person, aspirations beyond the present, those are gone. When people look at me, I bear enough superficial markers of an acceptable and potentially respectable even human being, money, career, education, presentation, even down to this ring on my finger and what it symbolizes, right?
Right.
I can speak on this because there's this cognitive dissonance, right? It is very difficult for people to place me, in the active throes of addiction.
Right.
So people don't feel that same level of, repulsiveness, that disgust, but we do. We feel that way with addicts. And that is something that, again, it ties back to, like, it does not matter. We do not need to like or even care for the people who are victims of violent crimes, victims of sexual violence, but we need to care for what has happened to them. We need to accept that this is, simply a truth, that victims of sexual violence may be the people we do not care about at all, but that does not at all, impact what they went through. And, you think about it, like, okay, let's say you're an addict and you were robbed by your dealer. He took your, like, I don't know, your Cartier, like, Tank Princess watch. I'm just thinking of something I'd be upset about if it were stolen. You're not going to the police and reporting that, right?
Excuse me, I have a crime to report. The person that I was just about to buy illegal substances from stole my Cartier bracelet. Wait, to kind of sorry, because you just said a lot of things here. And I think for the people listening, they might not fully like connect the dots here. But so you were someone who really struggled with addiction. And you're kind of briefly touching on it, but could you talk a little bit more in depth about what led up to all of this and how you think that your assault played a part? And you had mentioned that when we talk about this intersectionality between addiction and assault, there isn't a lot of research. And so that's why, Women's Advocacy Center is working on that. But could you talk a little bit about your personal experience? Because that's kind of what we have to go on right now.
This was 10 years ago, almost exactly 10 years ago, when I was raped. And this was something that I did not report. And this is something that I sit with every day. And I had begun using truly that exact day that it happened. And it had nothing to do actually with the sexual assault. I was dealing with some untreated mental illness, undiagnosed as well. And it snowballed a bit. I was made to leave school, went to multiple treatment centers, et cetera, et cetera. And, what can happen, interestingly enough, is when you go to a treatment center, I, as an 18-year-old living whatever, like, bullshit life I lived, like, like, I will say, like, extraordinarily privileged and very unsupervised, still did not know where to get heroin, but somebody there absolutely did. Multiple people
Right.
there absolutely did. And when I think about, my parents are Iranian immigrants, and education was absolutely, that was it. That was the most important thing to them. So being kicked out of school, being, told, oh, you may not be able to come back, it's like, fuck it. Why not try heroin?
Right.
What? Because there's nothing left to lose, like, in my mind. And I will say, and I emphasize this a lot when I say, like, I have reported and I have not reported, because it's really important to me that I do not come off as, like, being on my high horse. But it's also about, the choices we make. And to me, the most important thing as I've grown older is, can you sit with yourself when you make these decisions? When you, I don't know if you're familiar with, what is it? Eric Erikson. He was a German psychoanalyst, and I don't know how much of this is a bit is a bit like, junk science, but he developed the kind of, like, psychosocial stages of development. And the final one, and this is, I believe, like, around death, right on your deathbed, is integrity versus despair. Do you die knowing you have done everything you can in your life to live a full life, to achieve, everything you wanted to live up to your morals and values? Or do you die with despair knowing that you did not do so? And that is something that when making decisions, that is something that I do now, something that I've done the last few years, which is, I sit and I think, is this something I can live with? 10 years from now, if I look back, 20 years from now, if I look back, will I sit with myself and know that I did absolutely everything I could that aligns with my morals, aligns with my values? That is the most important thing in the world to me. And I did not do that day, or that year. I did not report, I did not say anything. And I think that also a lot of it ties back to when it comes to sexual violence. We often think we are, I don't want to say alone in it, but we think we are unique. Being a survivor of sexual violence is perhaps the least unique thing on the planet. We are not special at all. And in the most horrific way, we are not special at all. And that thought of like, oh, it was just me, it was something that I did that allowed this to happen is, it's deeply false. It will happen again, it absolutely will. And that was definitely my mindset of like, oh, this was kind of a one-off. And my struggles with addiction, they continued for a few years. And, I went to treatment. I was lucky enough to be able to get excellent treatment. But, it was always something that kind of stuck in my mind. Those experiences are things that they're quite difficult to let go, quite difficult to get past the things that you see and the things that you experience. It's a very different life from what I have now, and it is, I will say it's quite disturbing. I don't really talk often about, those things that I've been through, mostly to spare other people, because I'm like, I know you don't want to hear this shit. Like, it's kind of nasty and fucked up.
Mhm.
And that's, we feel like disgust, right? Like, it's repulsive to think about, like, the dregs kind of humanity. And like, I think about being there. I think about like the things that I witnessed, the things that I did myself, the things that were done to me. And again, I do not know a single woman who was not a victim of sexual violence in that time. Every single one I knew, sexual violence, and then violence in every other form. And it really defined a lot of who I was, I think, going forward, because, what is also like a woman's worst fear? It's not being believed,
Mhm.
right? And what discredits you more than, a history like that, a history of, of substance abuse, of mental illness, things that people will use against you. People that, my friends even that would like that I was close with at the time. I do remember texting somebody who was like, I was living in New York at the time. I was in Manhattan, and this guy was following me like on the subway, like down the car. And then when I left, he was following me up through the stairs, up, down a couple blocks. And I texted a couple friends, and they're like, "Are you on your meds? Are you okay?"
What?
Yeah, like, oh, are you using again? No, this is actually something that just happens. Men do follow women around very often. But that was when it hit me. And that was when I had this like absolute horrendous fear of, not ever being believed.
Mhm.
And I think that was why when it came to my Title IX case, why I fought so hard. Because, and I think maybe even that was probably part of why I wanted to start Women's Advocacy Initiative, is that fear of not being believed. It was so core, it was so fundamental to who I was, to how I behaved, to how I reshaped myself as a person. Like after I graduated and I went to New York, and I was kind of this like perfect model of an individual, like with my career, with, my friends, with relationships, with everything that you like, you look at someone, you want to aspire to be them, right? Like that was what I was. And all just to create this, manufactured image of someone who is believable, and who could not believe me now, right? And that's
Mhm.
like a heartbreaking thing for me to say, is, in the position that I am, the founder of this nonprofit, having a platform, being able to speak on these things. Who cannot believe me now? And I think that is truly like the fundamental core, maybe, of how I have lived my life the last several years. What's defined so much of what I've done, whether it's good, whether it's bad. And then leading up to this, leading up to the organization, because that is, that's primal, right? That kind of fear. And knowing in that moment, like, if I were to be killed, if I were to be raped, would I not be believed? And that follows you. And that's something that no one should ever, ever have to think. And, that is where, again, like, I feel like I say self-advocacy so often. I'm like a shill for big advocacy or
Mhm.
something. But that's where it comes in, is having to fight for your story, having to fight to be believed. And it is deeply unfortunate that we have to do so. And so many people have told me this, but it's unfortunate that it's, survivors who have to take up this mantle. But
Right.
I really I wouldn't trust anyone else to do so. Do you know? Like I think it's
How would
terrible
they
that when
know?
you, yeah,
They'd be
exactly.
speaking about something that they don't fully understand because they haven't been there.
We talk about this idea of self-advocacy, which I do think is important, and I think it's like a little bit like too important in our society. You had to take matters into your own hand because frankly, like a lot of Title IX offices, they don't do jack shit. There's
Hmm.
so many women I've talked to when I was working with the like sexual assault organization on my undergrad campus who would like come and talk to me and be like, I reported it. Title IX did absolutely nothing. Nothing has happened. They're literally still in the same fucking dorm as me. Like so many times as survivors, we're just like completely let down. And so that self-advocacy part is so important, but it's also like, what steps do you have to take to get there? You know what I mean? Like, it's partly from, yeah, within yourself, but then like when you have a culture that's telling you to have shame, to have blame, to like second guess yourself, or like, oh, maybe it wasn't that bad, or maybe it was just a bad experience, but it's not, like it is that bad. It wasn't just a
Hmm.
bad experience. Like that was literal like a violent crime, but we have to retrain our brain to understand those things and like
Hmm.
get rid of all the narratives that society has taught us up to this point so that we can get to the point where we can like not have that shame, not have that blame, and be able to advocate for ourselves. And it's just kind of sad how like there are so many steps we have to take to like get to that point where we can advocate for ourselves. And like I think that like Shannon in our case did a really good job of that, where she was like on it like all the fucking time. And I was like, I'm just
Well, because
like, I don't
sometimes
even
you
know what's
can't
happening.
though. That's the thing,
Hmm.
is like I don't know what I truly couldn't tell you why I was so okay with advocating for, for myself in our case, as well as I mean, there was other women involved. So maybe that's what it was, is I felt like if no one else is going to know what's going on and no one is pushing it through, then maybe I have to. But it was also just this mistrust of not knowing on what was going on behind closed doors. Like there was so little conversation about what was being done with the case. So I was always asking, multiple times a week. They probably were like, this bitch is a pain in our ass. Like we need to get this case done so she can shut the fuck up and get
Yes.
out of here. But truthfully, not everybody is able to advocate for themselves, like you had mentioned. But sometimes you just feel like mentally you can't deal with it. Like going through any sort of case, or whether it's civil, Title IX, whatever, it's so exhausting. And so maybe like keeping yourself separate and not advocating for yourself in that specific scenario might be the easier way. Like maybe advocating for yourself in that, maybe this is like backwards, but it could look like giving yourself the space that you need
Mhm.
from the case itself. I don't know. Those are just some out there thoughts. But thank you, Lauren. That was nice.
No, I mean, that's absolutely incredible. Like, I love hearing that. Whenever someone says, "Oh, I feel like they thought I was being a huge bitch," I'm like, "No, you're doing the right thing. No, absolutely. Like, make sure people think you're being a huge bitch because that's what advocacy is. That's how it's viewed by other people is you're
Yeah.
being a bitch." I used to, I worked with this, I guess I facilitated this support group for survivors of sexual assault, women survivors of sexual assault. It wasn't anything that was like therapy. It was just a support group that I facilitated. And, I had asked at one point, I was like, does anybody here like feel shame about what happened to them? And almost everybody raised their hands. And one woman, she had said to me, she's like, it is easier for me to blame myself than, my perpetrator, than my assailant.
Hmm.
Because if I tell myself, if I don't drink this, if I don't do these drugs, if I don't go out at this time, if I don't wear this, if I don't talk to these kinds of people, it will never happen again. It's this false illusion of control, right? It's,
Mhm.
you shrink, and she was shrinking her world. It was getting smaller and smaller, and she wasn't talking to anyone until it was just her. And so it's a choice ultimately, right? It's a sacrifice, is how I say it. It's giving up a lot, but like that is the risk we take, right? It's, sitting in that comfort, that illusion of control, but shrinking your world until it is down to nothing versus being able to live a full life. And I think that, what you bring up about like how do you take care of yourself versus, what you might think is something you have to do in a sense, which is, going forward, reporting, going through an exhausting, terrible process. that is, I think like a continuous battle that there really is no answer to. Other than, one thing that is so huge to me, so huge to us as an organization is community. And that is something that, again, I say this so often, it is not a Western thing. We shun the sense of community. Restorative justice, like that is a huge thing. I had spoken to I don't know if you're familiar with Marley Liss. She's really great. She's a speaker on this. She was the first, I believe, woman whose case of sexual assault was resolved using restorative justice in North America. And she goes around, she's a big keynote speaker. And when I first heard about that, I was like, oh, ew. Just because that was my visceral reaction, right? To like, oh, sitting in a room with your rapist and just talking for like 8 hours. I was like, okay, no, ew.
Mm-mm.
And then I thought about that more and more. And then, I researched it and you look at like recidivism rates, you look at how different that is. And then, in researching it, and speaking with my vice chair, Cadence, she's so brilliant. We're so lucky to have her. I learned more about how, this is a traditional practice, is a native practice, is an Eastern practice. This was actually what our justice system looked like before, what we have now, which is just, a colonialist thing that was implanted by, the UK, by Great Britain. This idea of the community coming together to try to, restore balance, to fix something. And, that's something that we severely lack. So what makes somebody feel drained, feel like they cannot go forward with something? It's a lack of support. Really often it's a lack of feeling like you don't have that community behind you. You don't have what you need behind you. You don't have that. I don't like using self-care because I feel like we've perverted that term, right, into meaning like, oh, just doing like face masks. But that kind of self-care, I think it's so, so important to have that community. And one thing we do like at WAI is we have a Share Your Story initiative, and we encourage survivors to submit, works of art, writing, any literature, anything that really is, significant to them, whether it's regarding their story or anything after, before. As important as I think that can be, there's only so much connection that exists through Instagram, people sharing their stories, a bunch of strangers. The most important thing, I think, is community, is that actual connection, being able to speak with somebody one-on-one, and building these communities is absolutely huge to us. And I hate referring to this. I think of like the AA model in a way, like, except for like not in like a dusty church basement, like stale donuts or whatever. But something like building these communities, and it's much easier when you start with like schools, right? Because it's a built-in insular community in and of
Right.
itself. But, obviously that's not the only place where sexual assault exists. So, building out these communities in cities and towns where survivors can come together, not only just to feel like they are not alone, but also maybe to talk about the things that we do not talk about when it comes to sexual violence, these things that we are made to feel extreme shame over. Why did you report a year later? Why was there prior consent? Why did you continue speaking with your assailant afterwards? These things that, so many of us, we only work out the why after talking about it with someone we trust, with someone we care about, someone who's also been through the experience. And to keep silent, which is something that this is so frustrating to me. It's what we encourage. We say it's a form of self-care. We say it's a form of, you own, it's your trauma. It belongs to you and no one else. But that encourages, silence. I mean, can you think about a single other traumatic event where people are widespread, fundamentally encouraged to not talk about? Like, I can't think of anything, because the idea of keeping something to yourself, of compartmentalizing, is, widely considered deeply unhealthy. And talking about it doesn't necessarily mean reporting it, but to discuss it with somebody who is trusted, someone who has been through it, somebody that can understand these things that you fear you will be torn apart for.
Yeah.
These things that make you doubt yourself. And that is something that's huge. And I think that is the thing that we're absolutely missing when it comes to, just the culture of sexual violence, of being a survivor, of existing alone as this like singular odd unit. And the term survivor in itself, I think it's it's important to empower, the individual who has been a victim of a violent crime. It is also incredibly important to not forget the perpetrator. and that there was a perpetrator, and this was a choice. And the same woman that had mentioned, she had been shrinking her world, she also said, it's easier to not blame him. I'm not mad at him because I don't view him as a person. He's just this monster. He's evil. And somebody who is like subhuman cannot, control what they're doing. They cannot be blamed for their actions. And that's something that I think we are all guilty of, is calling people monsters, dehumanizing them. And by doing that, we are completely stripping them of the fact that they have autonomy. They made these choices. They're not a monster. Yeah, they're a human being who made terrible decisions, who chose to do terrible, terrible things. But, we are escalating them into this like weird Michael Myers territory, or like, Jason from Friday the 13th, which just it's eliminating that autonomy. It's kind of dismissing the perpetrator and focusing solely on the survivor, which it's important to empower the individual. It's important to do, what maintains your health, what maintains, what is best for you. But we cannot forget that somebody has done this. I mean, can you imagine a serial stabber being on the loose and nobody talks about it?
Yeah.
And you're told, oh, it's your trauma, keep it to yourself. Like, if you have to, like, that is the most important thing, go get some counseling.
Yeah, it's a kind of a crazy concept. And to go back to this idea of like calling perpetrators monster, like I think that it's easier to dehumanize them for sure. Like it's so much easier to be like, oh my God, they're just like this monster, like they didn't know what they were doing. But then at the same time, when we do that, we are playing into that notion that like a rapist is that scary big guy in an dark alleyway, like with a knife, you know what I mean? And like we need to start, like I think that the like humanizing rapists is so important, because then we can teach people that like no, like rapists, they can be like that really nice guy next door to you, or they can be like your really good friend that you've known for 10 years who has like been so kind to your family. Like they most likely are that person. You know what I mean? Like they most likely are like a really good person to like most people, but then like behind closed doors, you don't know what the fuck they're like. And like I think it's important to do that and to bring in that aspect of like, no, they're a human being, and like for the most part, they're probably fucking normal, like really normal people. And they actively made terrible, terrible, traumatic decisions to someone.
That is so huge. I mean, just talking about like what 90% of rapists, it's someone it's someone in your social circles, in your adjacent social circles. It is not that, it is in very few cases that, dark man in the alleyway pulling you in and like doing something terrible. And in that case of like aggravated rape, I think, and this is horrible to say, but I think it's not uncommon to almost wish that it was just that whatever happened to you, because that's black and white, right? Like that is so readily believable. It's that one singular violent act rather than a series of steps of confusion, of coercion that led to a violent act. And sure, while that does occur, it is rare, and that is what we are taught. I think I blame stranger danger in the 90s, honestly, for really making us. I mean, that was me. Like, I really thought like a random person was just gonna kidnap me and keep me like chained to a radiator. My parents would always be like,
Criminal
no one's
Minds.
kidnapping you. Criminal Minds, Criminal Minds. I grew up
I
on
love
that
it.
shit.
Yeah, me too.
Me too. Like it was,
Years.
yeah. Everyone fucking watched that shit. And
my favorite part of Criminal Minds was when they were giving the profiles, it always like white male, 20 to 30, impotent. I was like, yes, slay. Impotent as fuck.
They were calling it out the way it really is.
You've done like such a beautiful job at like intertwining what Women Advocacy Initiative does into like, all these like stories that we're talking about. I think we should also like give you some space and like a chance now to talk about any other aspects of it that like we didn't get to talk about earlier in the episode. I feel like you have such like a wide breadth of areas that like you're focusing on, like things that you're doing that are just so important, if you want to, and just like things that you're excited about and like things that like fucking get you up in the morning.
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. No, that absolutely, it means the world, coming from you guys. One thing that, at the Women's Advocacy Initiative that we're so excited about is, and this is really core, I think, to who we are. I talk about like our mission as being two-pronged, but then, summing it up, it is, we are trying to eliminate those barriers that exist that prevent survivors from reporting their assailants. And, when we say it's two-pronged, we talk about, direct services is the first one. And we've been building out our survivor support network, which is a team of attorneys, of mental health professionals, and trauma-informed OB-GYNs. We've been working really closely with an organization that's built up a database of, trauma-informed OB-GYNs and continuing to add that kind of like trauma-informed consent education. And, creating these are people who have been vetted very closely by us, about 160 counselors across 50 states, speaking a total of over, I believe, 12 languages, culturally diverse. That's something that's personally very, very important to me. Again, like I mentioned, I'm the child of Iranian immigrants. Ensuring that we have that kind of diversity, that kind of, I personally, sometimes I do not want a white therapist. Like, that's just how it is. It's, people who can understand your position, what you are uniquely going through, the cultural impacts of what you are going through, and the unique struggles that you have. So our survivor support network, these are individuals that, again, we have vetted, that are trauma informed, that if you are a survivor who wishes to pursue some kind of action against your assailant, whether that is filing a Title IX complaint, police report, a civil suit, we will fund that. We will match you with an attorney that is, in your state, in your area, a counselor that is, again, in your area, that, we have an algorithm that will, match someone who is like, if there's a language barrier, match you to that. And it will be free of charge, because it is so heinous. The cost of a court case, what is it? It's about $45,000, I believe. And that's just the average. We're not even speaking about rural areas. And that's disgusting. I mean, I personally, I'm like, okay, I get that. But it is so, so sickening that financial barriers should never be a reason why someone can't come forward. So that is something that, again, we aim to eliminate. And I keep saying this. I say, survivors are the ones who have the power. There are so many survivors. I have met hundreds who say, I want to do something. I want to do something, but I don't know what. And we are all, I think, drowning in confusion. And so that's also something that we really aim to eliminate, is, informing people. The new Title IX rules and regulations that I believe will be in effect August 1st, I believe, which, Biden took his sweet fucking time on, but they're actually pretty good. And, when you look it up, it is not the easiest thing to find, a solid description of what your rights are. A lot of it is outdated. A lot of it is still information that was only valid really under what, I guess it's still in place, but DeVos and Trump and, how they changed a lot of the Title IX regulations. It is difficult to find, these are your rights. Why should you not be able to find them? So that is something that we also really attempt to help with, is information, and putting all that information in one kind of easy space, and access to that. If you are confused, if you have, if you would like to file a police report, but you want to know what it entails, that is something that we will help with. I say this is like the first prong of it, is eliminating that financial barrier, to counseling, to medical resources, to attorneys. And the second prong, and this is, to me, I think, I don't want to say more important at all, but to me, this is kind of what like hits me in my heart, is it's teaching women, teaching survivors to fundamentally reframe sexual violence, fundamentally reframe, how we feel about shame, how we blame ourselves, how we feel about, self-advocacy. And because, like I said, shame and self-advocacy, they cannot coexist. They simply just don't exist together. And to break that down, to place sexual violence under that category of violence, and again, this is a lofty goal, to fully reframe how we think about things. In doing so, I truly believe that this will work to eliminate that shame, to eliminate that victim blaming. And so, that's kind of the educational aspect, where we have seminars, we have fireside chats, at institutions, at educational, institutions, organizations. And to me, that's really huge. It's because I don't, again, like I said, I don't think people come forward because oh, look, my Fitbit or whatever proved that my heart rate was really high, or like I have a rape kit that proves it. You
Right.
come forward because you have the resources, you have the community, and you fundamentally understand that this is what you deserve, some form of justice.
Mm,
That shame has no place there. And once that has been eliminated, there is really nothing there in your way.
mm,
And
Yeah.
so comprehensive is kind of a word that we like to use often because that's what we like to be, is from start to finish, we will be there for you throughout your case, whether it's with counseling when we check in, and up to a year afterwards, because that doesn't go away, right? It's after you're still coping, you're still dealing with it. These communities that we want to build, or share your story initiatives, this is all about like it's building that connection. It's I keep saying this, like, we are not unique as survivors of sexual violence, which sounds so obnoxious, right? It's like saying you're not the main character or whatever, but it's so important to understand, because we understand how widespread it is, but somehow we also don't. It's something we also don't acknowledge.
It's
This
too
is
hard
an,
to comprehend
yeah,
almost.
no, it's an epidemic. So,
Mhm.
how do we tackle that kind of thing? And I think so much of it is like it's critical thinking, right? It's being able to go deeper than what we've been talking when we talk about consent, when we say, no means no, when we think about, what does that actually mean? What is coercion? What are power dynamics? How do they play into this? Um, and this isn't the stuff we're taught. So education is it's such a huge component. Oh, bless you. It's such a it's such a huge component of the work that we do. And when we talk about advocacy, it's one thing that we've actually just kind of started working on is with and survivors who go to get a rape kit done, having an advocate there, someone who is, I mean, I always liken it to like a doula, someone who is not there in a medical capacity, but solely there to support you, to advocate for you in what might be one of the most difficult times in your life, one of the most vulnerable times in your life. Um,
Mhm.
and to, yeah, have that option, which that is, a big legislative push. And right now, the way it's often being done is through police departments. And guess who doesn't give a shit about survivors? It's the police.
Right.
Probably because they're like the perpetrators 80% of the time. So,
She is
oh,
not
oh,
afraid to say anything, ladies and
you'll
gentlemen.
not catch me defending a cop ever. My best friend's twin was murdered in his own home by three police officers. An article actually just came out in the Washington Post that we were going to share. And so you will never fucking catch me defending a cop. That will, yeah, never happen. Which is, there it is. Like, you have these like power dynamics. Like, I don't know if you've heard about this case that's happening recently, which who I don't remember her name, but she's being accused of murdering her cop boyfriend. And everyone is like, this is an insane setup. The evidence is like absolutely ridiculous. It's all planted.
Hmm.
Because that's what happens. They're, I mean, police they're a cartel. They're just a gang. Like, that is how they operate, the way they have so much control over, the district attorneys, over the mayors. Like, that is disgusting. There is another something like that. Like, I would love to be able to tackle that, to talk about,
Hmm.
sexual violence committed by police officers. What is it? It's 80%, I believe, who have some kind of history of domestic violence. And it's here you have a population that is self-serving. You are outing yourself by becoming a cop.
Yeah, we
It,
have someone coming on the podcast in the next couple of weeks who is actually going to be talking about that. So stay tuned for that
oh,
because it's
amazing.
really interesting and it's a very interesting story. And the work that is being done about it is also really great. Like the Women's Advocacy Initiative is kind of like a sexual assault advocacy center, but for like the like entire country. You know what I mean? Like normally they're
Mhm.
like so regionally focused so regionally focused. But this one, you guys are like trying to have the biggest reach you can. And I think that's amazing. And like, I know that so many people listening here are going to love that and like want to partake in the resources that you are giving out to survivors.
I didn't even realize that advocacy centers were a thing. Like when I was assaulted, like I truly thought, like I'm Googling like what to do if sexually
Mhm.
assaulted. And the thing that comes up is the sexual assault hotline, which maybe if I had called them, maybe they would have told me, oh, you should look for an advocacy center in your area. But what is approachable about a hotline? Literally nothing. And
Mhm.
so, you know, as Lauren said, and I'll just kind of echo it, our biggest thing is just that we want to be able to help people after the fact. Like, what is the next step? Because unfortunately, it tends to be a thing of not if, it's when, until things start to shift. And so thank you for being somebody who's pushing forward and helping people when this happens to them, and for, breaking molds. Like, you're not afraid to say what is the truth. And I admire that a lot. And like, Lauren and I have talked about this a lot, that I always feel like she's the one who with these bold opinions, and I'm always worried about offending people. But like, we're going to offend people. And you had mentioned in our initial meeting that sometimes you make yourself like unemployable, like you're very unemployable. But like, who gives a fuck? You are out here making the biggest change, and you are out here advocating for people that can't advocate for themselves, or helping people learn how to advocate for themselves. So thank you so much.
Oh my God, absolutely. And thank
Okay.
you so much for everything you said. Thank you, both of you. It's such a privilege to be on here and be able to chat with you. I love the things that you talk about, and you are both like such incredible women doing like absolutely incredible things. You talk about the things that like you said, they are controversial, things that nobody wants to talk about. I know it's like the title of the podcast, but it's huge. Like, it's so important to have these conversations because we are stuck in a mold, right? Where we have to say the right things.
Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in and listened today. We love you all so much. We hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll catch you on the flip side, and cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you for being here.